On August 14, 1803, in Lima's wealthiest district, the servants at the Palacio de Agar mansion stumbled onto something that sent shockwaves through colonial Peru. 4 women, a marquise and her 3 daughters, all pregnant, all pointing to the same father. The Spanish crown tried to hide this mess, locking the story away in secret files, but eventually, bits and pieces slipped out. The scandal was so explosive it cracked open an already fragile society, and at the heart of it all, not a nobleman, not a merchant, not even a free man. The father was a slave named Domingo, owned by the same family he would ultimately shatter. Before I go any further into the tangled story of the Palacio de Agar household and the secret that nearly destroyed it, let me ask, if you're drawn to the darkest corners of colonial history, the stories that official records tried to erase, stick around and let us know where you're watching from. Your support helps us dig up these buried truths. This wasn't just some rumor whispered in back rooms or twisted by gossip. You can actually find pieces of it in church records, in letters from the viceroy, and in family ledgers that somehow survived the official purge. What you're about to read is a reconstruction of events the Spanish authorities thought were too dangerous to admit. 1803 wasn't a calm year in Lima. The city, once the glittering crown of Spain's South American empire, had started to show its cracks. Viceroy Gabriel de Avilés ran the city from his palace, always looking over his shoulder, knowing revolution was bubbling up in nearby lands. The strict caste system, Peninsulares, Criollos, Mestizos, indigenous people, and enslaved Africans, held together a fake kind of peace, enforced by centuries of hierarchy. And the Palacio de Agar family sat right at the top. Maria Catalina de Agarra Velasco, widow of the late Marquis Fernando Palacio, ruled her mansion with the same iron fist her husband once had. She was 43, still a force in Lima's social scene, and her opinion could make or break other elite families. Her 3 daughters were exactly what high society expected. Isabella, the oldest at 24, was set to marry a Spanish count's second son, a match designed to tighten their grip on Madrid's upper crust. Adriana, 22, was smart and curious, sometimes too curious for her mother's taste, always poking around in matters of estate and money that women weren't supposed to touch. The youngest, Sophia, was just 19. She was gentle, well-liked at parties, though people sometimes noticed she drifted off during conversations, lost somewhere in her own head. The Palacio de Agar mansion sprawled across almost a whole block in the San Lazaro district. Thick adobe walls painted that soft yellow color the rich favored. Inside, 47 servants kept everything running: cooks, housekeepers, stable hands, gardeners, you name it. Of those, 23 were enslaved people. Their work made the family's luxury possible. Domingo came to the household 6 years before, bought at auction after a sugar plantation near Trujillo went bankrupt. The family ledger said he was about 30, strong and, strangely for the time, literate in both Spanish and Portuguese. He was skilled with carpentry and metalwork, and the family paid 850 pesos for him. That detail about reading and writing really stood out. Most slaveholders kept their slaves illiterate. Education was dangerous, something that threatened their power. At first, the Marquise put Domingo in the stables, but his talent with wood and tools got him better jobs all over the mansion. He fixed furniture, reinforced doors, kept the fancy woodwork in the main halls looking sharp. Because of that, he ended up working close to the family, measuring windows in bedrooms, fixing locks on private studies, putting up new shelves in the library where Adriana liked to read. Servants later remembered that Domingo rarely spoke, kept his eyes down when family members walked by, and worked with quiet precision. Senora Vargas, the head housekeeper, once said Domingo wasn't like the other workers. He moved with this careful attention, always watching, but not in a way she could put into words. The house itself ran on rituals, habits set down long before she was born. Dawn meant mass in the chapel, then breakfast in the formal dining room. Visitors came to the salon while her daughters scattered to needlework, music, or overseeing the sewing for the poor. Afternoons slipped by in a blur of visits, heavy meals, and evening prayers. It all felt set in stone, built to last through generations, but lately, under all that order, something felt off. By March 1803, the servants started picking up on little changes. Isabella, who never missed morning prayers, began showing up late, looking washed out. Adriana stopped her daily walks in the garden, hiding herself away behind closed shutters. Then Sophia started asking for odd food combinations. The kitchen staff would trade uneasy glances every time she sent another strange request. Even the mayor's herself seemed distracted, especially during her meetings with Father Thomas Calderon. He watched her hands tremble over her rosary, caught her stumbling over prayers she used to recite perfectly. When he asked if she was all right, she brushed him off, insisting everything was fine, but her voice didn't match her words. By late April, the head seamstress finally spoke up. She went to Senor Vargas and said something was wrong. All the mares' dresses, and the girls' too, needed letting out at the waist. She quietly explained she'd seen this pattern before. These were the changes that came with pregnancy. Senora Vargas waved it away, blaming too many rich dinners during Lima's busy social season, but the seamstress wouldn't drop it. She pointed out how the younger women dodged tight corsets, how the mares suddenly couldn't stand certain foods, how often all four slipped away to rest, claiming exhaustion. It was impossible to ignore. 4 women from the same household, all showing the same signs. Sure, pregnancy itself wasn't a scandal. Widows remarried, daughters found husbands. But there hadn't been any announcements, no suitors, nothing that explained how all this happened at once. The silence left a space that filled up fast with whispers and worry. August 14th started like any other. Soft light painted shapes across the tiled floor. Servants moved through the halls, lighting fires, bringing water, laying out breakfast. The air smelled of baking bread and wood smoke. At 6 sharp, the bells called everyone to chapel. Servants took their spots, heads bowed. The family sat up front in their usual place. Father Calderon led prayers, his voice echoing off the painted saints. But something was wrong. Only Adriana came. She knelt alone, pale as chalk, gripping the pew so tightly her knuckles turned white. Father Calderon stumbled in his prayer, glancing at the empty seats meant for the mares and her daughters. In 6 years he'd never seen them miss prayers, not for illness, grief, nothing. He looked at Senora Vargas, waiting near the door. She only shook her head, worry plain on her face. She didn't know where they were. Father Calderon rushed through the prayers, dismissed the servants, and went straight to Adriana. "My child, where is your mother, your sisters?" She barely whispered, "You need to see for yourself, Father, in the blue room, quickly." The blue room, private, reserved for the mares' closest confidences. Father Calderon didn't wait. With Adriana at his side, he hurried down the corridors, cassock swishing as they went. Their skirts whispered over the polished floors. Senora Vargas kept a careful distance, her gut telling her that whatever came next, someone would need to bear witness. The door to the blue room hung just barely open. Father Calderon eased it back, then stopped so suddenly that Adriana almost bumped right into him. Inside, the Marquesa sat tall in her high-backed chair, flanked by Isabella and Sophia. None of them wore their usual extravagant morning dresses, just loose gowns, oddly plain. August sunlight poured through the windows, lighting up everything the fabric used to hide. You couldn't miss it, the round swell of each woman's belly. No clever tailoring could disguise it now. The priest's hand flew to his chest, fingers clutching at his crucifix. "Dear God in heaven, close the door, Father," the Marquesa ordered, her voice steady, full of old authority, even though her face betrayed how shaken she was. "What we say here doesn't leave this room." Senora Vargas, still in the hallway, caught the priest's eye before he shut the door. He gave her a small nod. "Stay close, be ready." Then the heavy door swung closed and she was left outside, heart pounding, mind racing with wild guesses. Inside, Father Calderon groped for words. His training had prepared him for plenty: adultery, theft, violence, pride. But nothing like this. 4 women, all from the same household, visibly pregnant, and not a single husband or fiancé, or even a whisper of a legitimate explanation. He finally managed, "When did this start?" Adriana answered, calm where her mother stayed silent. "We think it started in February. Not all at once, different times, but all within about 6 weeks. Who is responsible?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Isabella started to cry, shoulders shaking. Sophia stared at her hands. The Marquesa lifted her chin and met the priest's eyes. Her look held both shame and a hint of challenge. "Domingo," she said. "The carpenter." "The slave." Father Calderon's knees almost gave out. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. "Impossible." The access, the opportunity, the sheer... He couldn't finish the thought. The evidence sat right in front of him. We didn't know about each other until last month, Adriana said, her voice oddly measured, like she'd practiced this speech. Each of us thought we were alone. When Sophia started to show, she confessed to Mother. Then Isabella admitted it. Then Mother told us about herself. When we compared, it was all the same man. The priest sank into a chair, mind spinning. How? Under this roof, with all these servants, with your reputation? The Marquesa cut him off, her tone hard. He came to us separately. To fix furniture, a lock, a shelf, always with a good reason. Always when we were alone. He was persuasive. Father Calderon struggled. The church's rules were clear. Enslaved people couldn't consent. Not really. Any contact like this, by church law, it was an assault, no matter what the women said. But the Marquesa's voice didn't sound afraid, or even traumatized. There was something else there, something tangled and hard to name. We have to tell the Viceroy, he said. This is... No. The Marquesa's voice cracked like a whip. Absolutely not. Do you understand what would happen? Not just to us. To every family in Lima. If the Viceroy hears, it's official. Official means records. Records mean scandal. Scandal destroys us. Isabella's engagement? Over. Adriana's future? Gone. Sophia's name ruined. Our family will be a warning whispered in every parlor in the empire. But you can't hide this, Father Calderon protested. 4 pregnancies, 4... We're not hiding, Adriana said, quiet but firm. We're telling the story. With your help. And that's how it started. Not out of malice, but out of desperation. The conspiracy was born from fear, shaped by the crushing pressure of what society expected and the unyielding order that ruled their lives. Every part of colonial life came with its own set of rules and secrets. In that room, while the morning sun crept across the floor and servants worked somewhere in the background, 4 women and a priest started weaving a lie. It would need the silence of the whole house and the cooperation of dozens of people. But before any of that, they had to deal with the man at the heart of it all. Where's Domingo now? Father Calderon asked. In the carpentry shed, the mayors replied. He doesn't know we figured it out. He thinks each of us is guarding our own secrets. What do you want done with him? The question just hung there, heavy and dangerous. Under colonial law, if an enslaved man got a free woman pregnant, especially someone of the mayor's standing, he faced death. Not just any death either. The law called for something public, something cruel. Torture, forced confession, humiliation in front of a crowd, and then, depending on what the local authorities felt like, hanging or burning. They wanted to make an example, but killing him would only draw more attention. People would ask, why was he killed? What exactly did he do? And those questions would lead straight to the truth the family needed to bury. Sophia spoke up, her voice barely more than a whisper. Please don't hurt him. Everyone turned to her. Even Father Calderon looked stunned. He must face justice, he started, but Sophia cut him off. Justice? What justice do we have? He'll die because we exist, because the law says his life threatens ours, because what happened between us doesn't fit any box the church or the crown can accept. Killing him won't fix any of it. It just adds another death to the mess we made. The mayor's hand jerked as if she'd slap Sophia, but she stopped herself. Her face shifted. Anger, grief, finally something like acceptance. She's right, the mayor said. Killing him solves nothing. It just puts us all at risk. We need a different answer. Father Calderon could feel the ground shifting under him. His vows told him to report this, to the church, to the authorities. To do what was right, at least on paper. But he'd heard too many confessions, seen too much to believe the world was that simple. He felt himself sliding down a darker path, hiding the truth. What do you want to do? He asked. Just saying it, he knew he'd crossed a line. The mayor's leaned forward, her eyes cold and hard. Domingo disappears. Not dead. That draws attention, makes him a martyr, starts an investigation. He just vanishes. Sell him to a plantation in the north or send him to the mountains. Somewhere he can't talk to anyone, where nobody knows or cares about his story. And the children? Adriana asked, already thinking ahead. 3 families. Distant cousins, friends, people who owe us. Each takes 1 or 2 of the babies, raises them in other cities. Mother's child goes to family in Arequipa. Mine and Isabella's to different homes in Cusco. Sophia's to trusted friends in Trujillo. The births are quiet. The babies leave right away. In a few months, our bodies are back to normal. We go on like nothing happened. No scandal. And the fourth child? Father Calderon asked. You said 3 families, but there are 4 pregnancies. The room went silent. You could feel it, the weight of what no one wanted to say. Not every baby survives, the mayor said softly. Complications at birth. It's tragic, but it happens. We grieve. We move on. 1 lost child is sad. 4 pregnancies at once. Now that would destroy us. Father Calderon closed his eyes. He knew in that moment he wasn't just giving advice anymore. He was part of the cover-up. I need to talk to Domingo first, he said. To hear his confession. To understand. No, the mayor said, standing up, her voice steady. You'll talk to him only to tell him his fate. He doesn't get a say. He never did. The moment he touched any of us, he lost every right to justice or mercy. Do you understand? This ends today, one way or another. He either goes quietly from Lima, or we find a way to make sure he never causes trouble again. That threat lingered, sharp and heavy, in the room. Just when we thought the day couldn't get any darker, the mayor's icy logic pulled back the curtain and showed us just how desperate these women had become. If you're feeling unsettled by this story, share it with a friend who's into the grittier corners of colonial history. Hit like if you want to see more, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The showdown with Domingo went down that afternoon in the carpentry shed, tucked behind the main house. He was inside, lost in his work. Furniture repairs, a bit of carving, that sort of thing. Father Calderon came alone, just like the mayors told him to. Fewer people meant fewer problems if things went sideways. The place smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, familiar and almost comforting, but it clashed with the real reason for the priest's visit. Domingo was at his bench, planing a chunk of mahogany. He didn't even glance up when the door opened, even though he had to know someone was there. Domingo, the priest said. We need to talk. Domingo kept working for a few moments, then put down his tool and turned. His face was blank. No guilt, no fear, nothing to give himself away. Father, he said, voice flat. The women in this house are pregnant. Calderon said straight out. All 4 of them. They say you're responsible. Domingo's expression didn't change, but something flashed in his eyes. Maybe he was doing the math, figuring out his next move. They're lying, he said at last. Why would they lie about this? Domingo's reply was steady, almost quiet. Because they need someone to blame. Because the truth is even worse than their story. That answer made the priest's chest go cold. What truth? You think I forced myself on 4 women in a house packed with servants? No one heard anything, no one saw anything, and the only proof is what they say? Come on! Domingo let out a bitter little laugh. I'm property, Father. I don't get rights, or a voice, or even a fair hearing. But I'm not stupid enough to kill myself by raping someone. Whatever happened here, whatever the women are covering up, they picked me because I can't fight back. It makes their lives easier and ruins mine. Father Calderon didn't know what to say. He'd expected a confession, or maybe denial mixed with panic, not this cool, measured logic that poked holes in everything he'd believed. So what's the real story? The priest asked. Domingo didn't hesitate. The mayor's has been seeing men in her chambers for months. Isabella's Spanish fiancé was here long before their engagement was official. Adriana meets with Miguel Sandoval in the library when everyone thinks she's reading. Sophia's sleeping with Pablo Herrera, the young guy whose family runs the textile warehouse on Mercer. All 4 women. They got pregnant by men from their own world, and now they're pinning it on me. I can't defend myself, and they get to keep their reputations intact. He spoke with the weight of someone who'd watched it all unfold, not someone spinning desperate lies. Father Calderon's mind spun. Was he telling the truth? Sandoval and Herrera, those weren't made-up names. They were real. They were part of Lima's social life. The mayors did have guests, always with that veneer of respectability. But was there more going on behind closed doors? Why should I believe you? Calderon pressed. Domingo shot back. Why believe them? 4 different women, 4 different pregnancies, all blaming the same enslaved man, me, who somehow pulled it off without anyone noticing until now. It doesn't add up. It only makes sense if you're looking for someone easy to blame, someone whose life doesn't matter. Calderon felt his whole world tilt. If Domingo was telling the truth, then these women weren't victims. They were plotting to destroy an innocent man. But if the women were right, then Domingo was more dangerous than the priest ever realized. Neither version felt possible, but both felt too real to ignore. No matter what, Calderon said. The decision was final. You'll be sold and taken from Lima. Where you're going, no one will say. Speak of this to anyone, and you'll be killed. Is that clear? Domingo met the words with a steady gaze. I know I'm being punished for crimes I didn't commit. I'm here to protect the real guilty ones, he said. Truth doesn't matter when power calls the shots. I'm not a person anymore, just property. And property doesn't get justice. Will you accept this fate quietly? He didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted off, searching for options and finding none. At last he spoke. What choice is there? If I fight, I die. If I talk, I die. If I run, I die. The only way I might survive is by going along with it. So yes, Father, I'll accept it. But the truth is still the truth, whether anyone wants to see it or not. That night, Domingo vanished from the mansion. Senora Varga watched as two hired strangers, men who knew nothing about the family, led him away in the dark. The official record in the household ledger read, Slave Domingo sold to northern buyer, 850 pesos received, transferred to Trujillo-based buyer for plantation work. No buyer's name. No paperwork survived in Lima's archives. No ship manifest listed him as cargo leaving for the north in August 1803. As far as the world was concerned, Domingo just disappeared, wiped away, as if he'd never existed. The staff got their orders. Say nothing. Don't ask questions. Don't guess. Anyone who couldn't keep quiet got dismissed, handed a small sum and vague references that made finding new work almost impossible. In 2 weeks, 8 servants were gone. The rest understood exactly what was expected. Total enforced silence. Meanwhile, the pregnancies continued. The mayors withdrew from society, pleading illness. The daughters vanished from Lima's social scene, their absences explained away by stories, visiting family estates, religious retreats, helping sick relatives in far-off cities. In reality, all 4 women stayed hidden on the 3rd floor, out of sight. Only a trusted midwife from Callao, paid well and threatened even more, came and went, keeping watch over their health and preparing for the births expected in November and December. Father Calderon visited weekly, officially for spiritual guidance, but really to make sure the whole scheme didn't unravel. Each woman handled it differently. The mayors stayed in control, treating her pregnancy like another household problem to solve. Isabella wavered between panic and emptiness, staring for hours at the city she couldn't reach. Adriana withdrew, only speaking when she had no choice, her old curiosity snuffed out by resignation. Sophia, she whispered to her unborn child, her voice floating through the doors, full of both love and despair. October brought bad news. Miguel Sandoval, the merchant's son Domingo had named, suddenly left for Spain. His family said business called him to Seville. Pablo Herrera, the textile owner's son, vanished too, supposedly to manage things in Buenos Aires. Maybe it was all coincidence, but Father Calderon didn't buy it. Had the mayors warned them? Threatened them? Paid them off to disappear before anyone started asking questions? The priest kept his suspicions to himself. Sometimes knowing less was safer. November showed up with wild, out-of-season storms. Rain hammered the mansion, streets flooded, and on November 19th, the mayors went into labor. The midwife worked through the night as thunder shook the walls, and lightning turned the 3rd-floor rooms into a flickering world of shadows. By dawn, the household braced for what was coming next. I heard a baby cry, quick, weak, then nothing. The child didn't make it. The midwife told Father Calderon. Born too soon, lungs weren't ready. The mare's is healing, but the losses hit her hard. The priest gave the last rites, looking at the tiny body as he worked. The baby's skin was darker than you'd expect from Castilian blood. The nose wider, the lips fuller. Alive at birth, he was sure of it. That first cry sounded strong, but the midwife just wore her mask of professional calm. The bundle she handed over for burial was already cold, the infant marked by the same heritage everyone knew must be hidden. 2 days later, Isabella gave birth to a healthy boy. Trusted servants whisked the newborn off to the Sanchez family in Cusco under cover of night, sworn to secrecy. A week after that, Adriana delivered a girl who left within hours for the Flores home in Arequipa. And then, on December 8th, Sophia had twins, a boy and a girl, loud and healthy. Both were sent away, each to a different family, and Father Calderon made sure he never learned their names. By December 15th, the 3rd-floor rooms were empty again. The midwife left with enough money and enough threats to keep her quiet for good. The servants who'd seen too much got generous pay and then a swift dismissal. New staff came in, clueless about what had happened. By spring, the mayors, Isabella and Adriana, slipped right back into society, figures restored, reputations untarnished. But Sophia never recovered. She stayed shut in her room, turned away visitors, barely ate, didn't speak. Father Calderon saw the signs: deep sorrow, what doctors called nervous collapse, what we'd call severe postpartum depression mixed with trauma and grief. Sophia died in March 1804. The parish records blamed consumption, a catch-all excuse that covered many things. Her funeral drew the right crowd, Lima's elite offering their condolences. Nobody guessed the secrets she took with her. Life in the house adjusted. The scandal seemed to have passed, the crisis over. But Father Calderon noticed the women had changed. The mayors, once perfectly poised, now jumped at little noises and demanded the lamps stay lit all night. Isabella grew terrified of darkness, refusing to be alone without candles burning all around her. Adriana, the daughter who used to question everything, now clung to church rituals, attending Mass every day, praying nonstop. Desperate for forgiveness for sins she couldn't name, the uneasy calm after Sophia's death didn't last. In May 1804, a letter arrived from Cusco that shattered the careful order the family had built. Senora Vargas brought it straight to the mayors, recognizing the Sanchez seal and knowing exactly what it meant. The mayors opened it with shaking hands, her face going pale as she read. When she finished, she sat perfectly still, then finally spoke. "The child is dead," she said, voice flat. "The boy we sent to the Sanchez family. Fever took him 2 weeks ago." Senora Vargas, the only servant who knew everything, crossed herself. "God rest his soul?" The mayors didn't stop. "There's more." Her voice had a sharpness that made Vargas's stomach twist. Before he died, a doctor examined him. He noticed the boy's features didn't match the Sanchez family. People started asking questions. The family wants reassurance there'll be no trouble from their act of charity. In other words, they wanted money to stay quiet. The child's death gave the Sanchez family leverage, and they weren't above using it. This started a pattern that would... The next 3 years weren't kind. The families who took in the children, the Flores household in Arequipa, the Ramirez family in Trujillo, quickly figured out that charity came with a price tag. Every few months, letters arrived. At first they sounded gentle, almost apologetic. Then the tone shifted, businesslike, blunt. The kids needed schooling, clothes, medicine. Everything cost more than anyone expected. And the families wanted something for their silence. The bills kept coming. She paid, of course. What choice did she have? But you can't keep draining the family's coffers forever without someone noticing. Thomas Ibarra, her steward, was bound to catch on. He'd watched over the estate's books for 20 years and didn't miss much. Soon enough, he started asking about these odd payments, always to the same families, always on schedule, always a little too tidy to be ordinary charity. She brushed him off with talk of distant relatives and old debts, but Ibarra wasn't buying it. By November 1805, he went to Father Calderon. Maybe the mayors was being cheated, he said, maybe extorted. The priest tried to calm him, swore the payments were above board, but Ibarra only got more suspicious. He knew legit charity didn't look so much like a ritual or a payoff. Same sums, same dates, no receipts, no thank you notes. Someone's blackmailing the family, he decided. But why? What secret cost this much? Calderon nudged him to take it up with the mayors herself. He knew she'd have to either trust Ibarra with the truth or ditch him for someone less nosy. She chose trust, well, part of it. In her office, her usual steady voice cracked just a bit. "I made mistakes," she admitted. "There was a man, a brief affair. A child came of it. The families you found are raising that child. I pay to keep this secret." It was true, just not the whole truth. Ibarra let it go. He had the tact of a man who knew when to pretend. He didn't push, didn't judge, just kept the books, making sure those expenses slipped quietly into his private coded ledgers. Still, the mayors couldn't shake her nerves. How many other sharp-eyed servants or business partners are adding things up? She wondered. All it would take was one more person connecting the dots to that disastrous year in 1803. The secret, she realized, never really stayed buried. You just had to keep shoveling. Then spring brought fresh trouble. In March 1806, a package arrived from Arequipa, a letter and a portrait. The Flores family had commissioned an artist who, unfortunately, was too talented for comfort. He'd captured the little girl's face in perfect detail, her darker skin, her bone structure, features that shouted her true heritage to anyone who looked. The letter was blunt. "People are talking," it said. "Our neighbors notice the child looks nothing like us. The priest suspects we're hiding the illegitimate child of a servant or a slave. This is hurting our reputation with the church. We need more money, or we'll have to reconsider. So, more payments, more threats." The Ramirez family sent similar news from Trujillo. The children, almost 4 now, were starting to stand out. The stories about distant cousins were thin and wearing thinner with every year. Adriana, who'd kept herself together since the beginning, started to crack. She clung to the church, prayed for hours, wore a hair shirt until her skin bled. Father Calderon saw what was happening. Guilt working its way through her, a desperate need for punishment she couldn't escape, to atone for sins of the spirit through physical suffering. "I dream about her," Adriana admitted one day, her voice raw. "My daughter. I never held her. Never even saw her face before they took her. But in my dreams she's clear as day. She has my eyes. I abandoned her to strangers because I was scared. Because I didn't want my life to change." "You did what you had to do to survive," the priest told her, but his voice was tired. Years ago, he'd believed that, but faith in his own judgment had faded. "Survival isn't virtue," Adriana shot back. "We survived by hurting others. We exiled a man for crimes he might not have committed. We scattered children like they were nothing. Sophia, she couldn't live with what we'd done. How long do we keep sacrificing people to keep our secrets? How many more have to die before we admit what we are?" A pounding at the door cut her off. Senora Varga appeared pale and breathless. "Father, you need to come now." "Isabella's got a visitor from Cusco." They found Isabella in the formal salon, facing a young man whose clothes still carried the dust of travel. He stood tall, confident, and right away it was clear why Senora Varga looked so shaken. He seemed about 20, dressed well despite the journey, with features that blended European and indigenous blood. Something about him demanded attention. "Sorry to intrude," he said, bowing to the women. "I'm Carlos Mendesabal. I think you knew my father, Domingo, who worked here some years back." The world tilted for Father Calderon. He gripped the doorframe to stay upright. This couldn't be happening. Domingo had been sold off years ago, deliberately sent away, his story buried. Now here was his son, standing in their house, speaking with an education and confidence that didn't fit the life of a slave's child. "We didn't know Domingo had a son," the Marquesa managed, her voice smooth, her face unreadable. Old political instincts kicked in. "When did you last see your father?" "I never have," Carlos answered. "He was taken when I was 16, sold by his owners. I've spent years chasing rumors, looking through records, following his trail, trying to find him or at least learn what happened. Everything led me here to the Palacios de Aguirre mansion. Records show he worked here from 1797 to 1803. I was hoping you could tell me what became of him." Isabella had turned ghostly pale. Adriana clung to a chair, knuckles white. The Marquesa kept her expression carefully blank, years of noble training holding everything in place, even as panic crept in. "I'm afraid your father was sold to a plantation in the north," the Marquesa said, her words smooth as glass. "I don't remember the exact location. It was years ago, and we've had many workers since then. I'm sorry I can't help." Carlos watched her eyes sharp. "That's odd. I checked the shipping records in Callao, plantation registers in Trujillo and Chiclayo, even the mining rosters in the mountains. There's nothing about a slave named Domingo arriving anywhere in 1803. It's like he vanished. And vanishing isn't easy, not with property that's supposed to be tracked every step of the way." The accusation hung between them. Father Calderon stepped forward, trying to take control. "Records from that era aren't always reliable," he said. "There were wars, chaos, lots of mistakes. Sometimes slaves were resold under new names. Your father could still be out there working somewhere, just lost in the paperwork." Carlos's look said he didn't buy it. "Maybe. Still, I'd like to speak with servants who were here back then. They might remember something." The Marquesa shook her head. "Most of the staff from those days are gone. People come and go. The few who stayed probably didn't know your father well. He worked mainly in the carpentry shed, away from the main house." Carlos nodded, thinking it over. "Thank you for your time. If you hear anything about my father, I'd appreciate it if you let me know." He handed over an address in Lima reached, then left with the same unsettling politeness he'd shown when he arrived. After the door closed, the three women and Father Calderon just stood there, quiet, each of them turning over what had just happened. Their past, something they'd all tried so hard to bury, suddenly felt dangerously close to the surface. Adriana finally broke the silence, her voice flat. He knows something. The way he looked at us, the questions he asked. He's not just fishing. He suspects more than he lets on. We don't give him anything, the Marquise said sharply. He's got no proof, no leverage, nothing. He's just the son of a slave poking around where he doesn't belong. If we ignore him, he'll get bored and move on, but Father Calderon wasn't so sure. Carlos Mendizábal had shown a level of resourcefulness, education, and sheer drive that didn't fit what people expected from someone of his background. He'd already found out about the missing paperwork, the strange gap where Domingo's records should have continued. How long before he started piecing together the rest? The pregnancies, the hidden births, the children sent away to different corners of Peru. That night, Father Calderon couldn't sleep. He sat alone in his office, replaying the last 4 years, counting the damage from the lie he'd helped build. Sophia dead from heartbreak. 4 children, well, 3 now, growing up with strangers, carrying secrets they didn't even know they had. Domingo vanished, and now Carlos was dangerously close to dragging it all into the light. The women he'd once thought untouchable, aristocrats with effortless grace, were now just shadows, held together by fear and stubbornness. Then, at midnight, a knock. Senora Vargas stood there, pale in the lamplight. "Father, you have to come. Something's happened at the house." "It's Isabella." She told Carlos everything. The blue room was chaos. Isabella sat in her mother's old chair, red-eyed and shaking. Carlos stood by the window, his face a mix of shock and something colder, maybe satisfaction, now that his suspicions were confirmed. The Marquise paced like a trapped animal, her usual calm nowhere to be seen. Adriana huddled in a corner, clutching her rosary, eyes unfocused. Father Calderon stepped in and felt every secret he'd kept, every lie he'd told, drop onto his shoulders like a physical weight. "Tell me she's lying," the Marquise demanded, turning on Carlos, desperate. "Tell me you put those ideas in her head, that you tricked her." Carlos cut her off. "I didn't say a word." His voice was sharp. "I came to thank her for yesterday, to say goodbye before I left for Cusco. She opened the door, saw me, and just broke down. Everything came pouring out, like she'd been holding it in for years. 4 women, 1 slave, secret pregnancies, children scattered across Peru. A whole conspiracy, wrecking lives just to keep up appearances. You have no proof," the Marquise snapped. "Her word means nothing." Carlos reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of papers. "I have more than her word. I told you I was looking into my father's disappearance. I just didn't say how deep I went. I have testimony from servants you fired in 1803, people you paid to forget. I have letters between you and the families who took in your grandchildren, letters sent through go-betweens who kept copies as insurance. I have medical records from the midwife in Callao, 4 births in 2 months, all in your house, all babies sent away right after." The midwife wrote everything down. When she died, her daughter found the records and, suspicious, showed them to a lawyer who works with me. The blood drained from the Marquise's face. "That's not possible. We were careful." "No," Carlos said. "You were desperate. Desperate people slip up. They trust the wrong servants, pay the wrong people, think secrets can be bought. But some people keep records to protect themselves. That midwife wrote down every detail, including yours. When her daughter found those notes, she didn't just throw them away." Father Calderon felt his knee. Everything they'd kept hidden had been coming undone right under their noses, and they'd had no idea. "What do you want?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "Justice," Carlos said. "Just that. For my father, exiled or killed to keep your secrets. For the children you abandoned. For the truth you buried. I want it all out in the open. I want everyone to know exactly what the great Palacios Diagar family did to save face. That's not justice. That's revenge," Adriana said quietly, her voice breaking into the room for the first time. "You want to ruin us like we ruined your father. Can you blame me?" Carlos's words shook with pain beneath the anger. "You took my father. You tore children from their mothers. You built your lives on suffering and silence. Someone has to tell the truth. The truth won't just hurt us, the Marquise said, trying to gather herself. The children you say you care about. If this comes out, they'll be branded forever, illegitimate, offspring of a slave and aristocrats. You know what that means for them: discrimination, rejection, endless legal battles over inheritance and status. Your search for justice dooms them to a life on the outside. Carlos hesitated. For the first time, the certainty in his voice faltered. The Marquise pressed on. Think about what happens if you go public. You don't get your father back. Nothing that happened gets undone. You just spread the pain, and innocent children, who had no say in any of this, pay the price. If you really care about justice, think about the damage you'll do. So what do you suggest? Carlos shot back. More silence? More lies? We all just keep pretending while you live in comfort? I'm suggesting something else, Adriana said, standing up, her voice steadier than anyone expected. Private acknowledgement. The truth, written down, sealed, but safe, so the children can know where they came from someday without being destroyed by gossip and scandal. You get compensation for what you lost, for the years you spent searching. Ask your questions. We'll answer them, honestly this time. No more hiding, at least not from each other. Her words hung there, not really satisfying anyone, but maybe offering a way forward that didn't end in total ruin. Father Calderon could see the sense in what she said, though he wondered if Carlos could ever accept less than full vindication. I want the whole story, Carlos said finally. Not the cleaned-up version, the truth. Did my father force himself on you, or were you part of it? Was he a monster, or just a scapegoat? The women looked at each other. Long, heavy looks, so much history crammed into a silent moment. Finally, the Marquise answered, her voice stripped of its usual power, just tired and real. I don't even know what truth means anymore, she said. Did your father come to me first? Yes. Was it forced? That word gets complicated when you talk about a slave and a free woman. The law says he couldn't ever consent because by law any sex between a slave and free woman is a crime. But the law also says I couldn't consent because he wasn't considered a real person. The words don't fit. Honest talk about it almost isn't possible. Try, Carlos said. He was kind, Isabella whispered, tears running down her cheeks. I was alone, scared of the marriage they were planning for me, terrified of leaving Lima for a strange country and a stranger. Your father came to fix a broken lamp in my room. We just talked at first. He listened in a way nobody else did. He saw me as a person, not just a bargaining chip, and somehow, his kindness turned into something more. It was the same for me, Adriana said. He treated me like my thoughts mattered, like I was worth listening to. In this world, women are supposed to be beautiful and quiet. Your father actually spoke to me as an equal. I knew it was forbidden, and I knew the risks, but I was tired of being just another pretty thing in my mother's house. I wanted to be seen as human, even if only by a man everyone else called property. Sophia wrote about it in, after her death, they found a journal. Father Calderon remembered it. She'd written about Domingo, said he was the only person who made her feel real, not just some doll arranged for other people's needs. The priest burned those pages, knowing they could never see the light of day, but he remembered every word. The honesty in them hurt. Then came the mayor's confession, the hardest one of all. I was lonely, she said, the words dragging out as if they hurt to say. My husband died. Suddenly I was responsible for everything. This estate, our social standing, my daughter's futures. Everyone wanted something from me. Decisions, permissions, judgment. Your father didn't. He just came to fix a lock in my study, and we talked about nothing important. It was a relief. For a moment I stopped being the mayor's or a mother or a widow. I was just a woman, and yes, it turned into more. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. There was no way back. Carlos listened, his face shifting, anger, grief, confusion, and finally, something like understanding. He never forced you, he said, his voice empty. You were all part of it. And when the consequences caught up, you saved yourselves by sacrificing him." "Yes," Adriana said into the silence, when no one else would. "We sacrificed him to protect our place. We told ourselves we had no choice, that society left us no other way, that his life was worth less than our reputations. We lied, we made choices, and people who deserved better paid the price. But knowing we were wrong doesn't undo it." Carlos leaned in. "Where is he? If you didn't sell him north, what happened? Is he alive?" The question dropped like a stone in the room. Father Calderon glanced at the mayors, who glanced at Isabella, who looked at Adriana. They'd all avoided saying it, even to themselves. But now it was out in the open. "We don't know," the mayors admitted. "He was taken in the night. 2 men, hired through go-betweens, sent to get him out of Lima. We were told he'd be moved somewhere so remote his story could never reach anyone who mattered. We made sure we didn't know more. What we didn't know, we couldn't reveal. Not by accident, not under pressure. So he's probably dead," Carlos said, flat, blunt. "He could be," Father Calderon said, feeling the weight of it settle on him. "Just one more sin among many. The men we hired, they solve problems permanently sometimes. We told ourselves he'd just been moved because the alternative was too much to face." "Murderers," Carlos said, quiet but clear, looking at each of them. "All of you. Maybe you didn't swing the blade, but you gave the orders. You paid. You looked away while someone else did what you couldn't. No one argued. The truth just hung there, heavy, blocking out any excuse." "I want their names," Carlos said. "The men who took him. And I want to see those children, the ones who survived. They deserve the truth about their father, even if the world never hears it." That was the deal they struck. In that room, on a sticky Lima night in March 1806, among people wounded by the same secret in different ways, Carlos got the names of the men who'd taken Domingo, plus money to search for him. He'd meet the surviving children, have the chance to know his half-siblings, and learn the truth about their father. In return, he'd keep the scandal quiet, knowing public exposure would just ruin the children. Father Calderon wrote up the real story of 1803 and what came after, sealed it in the church archives for their descendants to read, but only after everyone involved was gone. It wasn't confession, but it was something. The truth lived on, even if nobody liked the way it had to be hidden. It protected the ones who needed it most. Carlos left the next morning, armed with the names Tomasara had uncovered years ago. Their story came out once they'd been paid enough, and honestly, it was every bit as awful as everyone feared. Carlos Mendizábal showed up at the mansion 3 weeks later, looking like he hadn't slept since he left. Something in his eyes said he'd traded a part of himself for the truth. Father Calderon met him at the door, saw the look on his face, and right then, he knew. Their worst suspicions were true, even if no one had dared to say it out loud. Carlos didn't bother with small talk. "I found them," he said. "The men who took my father. The men remembered the job, no problem. You don't forget getting hired to erase someone from the world, especially from a house like this." Calderon led Carlos to the study where Isabella and Adriana waited, tense and silent, like prisoners about to hear their sentence. Carlos didn't sit down. He stood, stiff as a board, like if he let go for even a second, he'd fall apart completely. "My father never made it out of Lima," he said. "The men took him out by boat in the dark. They'd been told he could never come back, never talk about what happened here, never show up anywhere official where he might testify. The only way to be sure, make sure he never got anywhere at all." Isabella made a tiny broken sound. Adriana just shut her eyes, face frozen. They waited until the boat was out in the bay, then dropped his body in the deep. Carlos kept going, his voice flat like he couldn't risk letting any emotion through. His father was alive when they put him overboard. Awake. He didn't fight, didn't beg, just stared at them as the water swallowed him, like he'd known all along it would end this way. The men said they'd done this sort of thing before, but his father's calm acceptance shook them up. "Most people fight to live," they told Carlos. Your father almost seemed relieved. The silence after that felt like it might choke everyone in the room. Calderon realized he couldn't get a full breath, like the air itself was tainted by what had happened. Carlos looked at Isabella, then Adriana, voice sharp. You're murderers. Not by accident, not by letting someone else handle it. You did this. You paid for it. You chose not to know the details so you could pretend you weren't responsible. But that was a choice too. You killed my father because he was inconvenient. Isabella tried to protest, her voice cracking. We didn't order murder. We asked for removal, for him to be relocated, that's all. Carlos cut her off, angry and cold. You hired men who make people disappear. You never asked them to keep him alive. You didn't care what happened as long as it didn't happen here. You set things up so murder was the easiest answer, and then hid behind ignorance. That's not innocence, that's cowardice. Adriana suddenly stood, walked to the window, and threw up into an urn. The awful sound filled the room, ugly and final. When she finished, she stayed bent over, shaking, as if the truth itself was poisoning her. Isabella's voice came out small. What do you want from us? We can't bring him back. We can't undo this. We can't even admit what we did without destroying the children we meant to protect. So what do you want? Our lives, our reputations, our souls, if we still have them. Carlos stared at them, something in him turning to ice. I want you to live with it. I want you to wake up every day knowing you killed an innocent man just to keep your place in society. I want you to see his face in mirrors, in shadows, when the lies stop long enough for the truth to catch up. Remember that under Lima's Bay, chained and lost in the dark, my father's bones are down there because you cared more about your good name than his life. He headed for the door, then stopped. I'll keep my promise about the children. They'll never know everything. I'll tell them their father died in transit. That much at least is true. I know you think he was a good man trapped by bad luck, and sure, that's true. But don't get this twisted. I'm not keeping quiet for your sake. I'm protecting them, sparing them the kind of truth that would wreck everything they believe about who they are. You get the whole ugly story. They get something softer, something they can live with. That's not about mercy. It's about making sure the people truly at fault carry this burden, not the ones who had no say. After Carlos left, the three women and Father Calderon just sat there, the silence stretching out so long it felt like it might never end. Every so often, a servant would knock, asking about dinner or if they needed anything, and each time someone would wave them away. The sun moved across the room, lighting it up and then leaving it behind, so that by the time darkness filled the study, the air felt heavy, almost impossible to breathe. Finally, when night had settled in, Adriana broke the silence. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said. There's a convent in Cusco that'll take me. I'll take vows, spend the rest of my life praying and trying to make up for what I've done. It won't fix any of it, but at least I'll stop pretending I deserve this life. That's not atonement. That's just running away, the Marquise said, though her words didn't have their usual bite. Maybe Adriana heard the truth in that. Still, she shook her head. I can't keep living here in this house, in this city, surrounded by people who think I'm someone I'm not. Every party, every handshake, every polite lie, it all feels like I'm dancing on my father's on Domingo's grave. I have to stop. Isabella stayed quiet, but the way she looked at her sister said everything. She understood, even if she wasn't brave enough to go herself. The Marquise stared at her own hands, like she half expected to see them stained with blood that wouldn't wash away, no matter how many years passed. Father Calderon watched these women face up to what they'd done, and something inside him broke too. He'd joined the priesthood believing in forgiveness, that confession and penance could heal anything. But this was beyond anything he'd learned in theology. How do you make up for a murder dressed up as necessity? How do you confess sins you committed by looking away, by letting others do what you wouldn't name? And how do you grant forgiveness when the people hurt most can't speak anymore? The documents he'd sealed in the church archives weren't just a record. They were a mark of his own failure. He'd helped them bury the truth, telling himself he was protecting innocent children, when really, he was just too scared to face the darkness and people he cared about. After Carlos's revelation, everything shifted. Most people in Lima never found out what happened, but those caught in the scandal were changed for good. Adriana kept her word and left for the convent, taking almost nothing except a generous donation to smooth her way in. She wrote home sometimes, quick letters about convent life, but there was nothing in them, like her soul had already checked out, even if her body stayed behind. She died in 1811. The doctors called it pneumonia, but Father Calderon always figured she just gave up. Isabella never found her old confidence again. She went to the events she had to, smiled for the right people, but something deep down was broken. She got into the habit of checking the locks over and over, as if she could keep the past out by making sure every door was shut tight. Suitors came and went, drawn by the family name and fortune, but nobody ever really saw her. She never married. In 1815, she died in her sleep. The servants who found her said she looked peaceful, almost grateful, like she'd finally escaped. The Marquise outlived them all, running the house until she died in 1819 at 58. She never mentioned those days again, acting like they'd been erased. But people close to her noticed she'd changed. She gave away huge sums to fight slavery, to help the poor, to build schools for any child who needed them. She never explained why, but her actions spoke for her. A conscience trying to make amends the only way she knew how, by using her wealth to fight the same kind of wrong she'd once helped create. Carlos Mendizabal kept close ties with his half-siblings, visiting them often but never telling the whole truth. He called himself a family friend, a benefactor who just wanted to help. As the kids grew up, they enjoyed his company, never guessing they were family. The girl living with the Flores family in Arequipa was sharp as a tack. She ended up marrying a lawyer and raising her own children, never suspecting that her real mother had spent her life behind convent walls, haunted by regret for the daughter she'd left behind. The boy with the Ramirez family in Trujillo learned the merchant trade and eventually did well for himself, but he never knew his true father's bones lay under Lima's Bay, buried to hide secrets he'd never discover. The twins Sophia delivered, made it to adulthood, raised by a kind family who loved them, even though no one ever explained how the babies had come into their lives. They grew up thinking their mother died in childbirth, which, in a way, was true. Sophia's body survived delivery, but her spirit never recovered. Sometimes, a sad-eyed man would visit, bringing gifts and asking about their lives with a little too much interest for a supposed family friend. They never realized Carlos saw pieces of a lost woman in them, a woman who'd paid the highest price for a scandal she helped spark but couldn't withstand. Father Calderon stayed on at Lima until poor health forced him to retire in 1817. He moved to a small parish outside the city and spent his last years trying to write an honest account of everything that happened. But the words wouldn't come out right. He found himself stuck between sharing too much private pain and not enough understanding of how good people could do terrible things. In the end, he burned his unfinished manuscript before he died in 1820. Some truths, he decided, did more harm than good, or maybe he just couldn't face seeing his own part in it all laid out on the page. The sealed documents in the church archives sat untouched. Years slipped by. The Palacios Dieger family faded from the spotlight as Peru fought for its independence and tried to figure out what kind of country it wanted to be. The rigid social rules that made the scandal so devastating slowly faded too, but never went away completely. The children born from those tangled secrets got old without ever learning who they really were, shielded by a silence that cost so many, so much. In 1872, a researcher digging through old church records on a totally unrelated matter stumbled across Father Calderon's sealed documents. As he read, horror grew in him. He understood exactly what he'd found, but everyone involved had been dead for decades. The children had families of their own now, living with no clue about the scandal in their bloodline. The researcher faced the same dilemma as those who'd lived through it. What good would it do to drag all this out into the open? All it would do is spread pain. So he resealed the documents and made a note in the archive. Records concerning the Palacios Dieger household, 1803-1820. Sensitive material, not to be opened except by direct descendant request or church authority, and so the papers stayed locked away, holding truths that no longer had an audience. The Palacios Dieger mansion changed hands again and again over the years. Eventually, it got chopped up into apartments as Lima grew and rich families moved out to new neighborhoods. The third-floor rooms where 4 women had once hidden their pregnancies became home to working-class families who knew nothing about the secrets soaked into those walls. The old carpentry shed where Domingo worked was demolished, making way for new construction. The blue room, witness to so many painful talks, got a fresh coat of paint, new furniture, and a new life, with no trace left of the old conspiracies and confessions. Lima's Bay kept its own secrets. The tides came in and went out, Boats crossed the water, and the city kept spreading along the shore. Whatever was left of Domingo lay deep beneath the waves, hidden and protected by the silence of the sea. They kept their secrets better than anyone else ever could. That scandal in 1803. Everyone thought it might tear Lima society apart, but it just faded away, hidden by the kind of silence that always seems to shield the powerful. The kids made it through. The families stayed right where they were, untouched. The truth got lost, buried under compromise and complicity. If justice existed, it showed up as private misery behind closed doors, while life in public rolled on, untouched. So what do you make of this story? Was justice done, tucked away in people's quiet suffering? Or did the powerful just dodge the fallout like they always do? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you're drawn to these shadowy corners of colonial history, where secrets stay buried and those in charge bend reality, stick around. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who likes to dig under the surface. Catch you in the next one.